afternoon, West Ham fans. Russ, the West Ham Network. Hope you are all safe and well, my friends. Happy Monday. That weekend goes so quick, doesn't it? Goes too quick, my friends. But it is the world famous Hammers Headlines Association with the KUMB.com boys. Don't forget to check them out in the link below. This morning, this afternoon, lunchtime, whenever, all days blend into one now. We spoke about an article which was released by Claret and Hugh talking about the cost of appointing Lopetegui, the cost of appointing Graham Potter, and goes into the numbers a little bit. And yeah, it doesn't paint a good picture, let's be honest, in terms of particularly with the January transfer window coming up as well, and the need to plug some gaps in that squad yet again. But a few rumours, a few bits of info over the last sort of few days, and so we thought we'd sort of collate them for you as we always do at Hammers Headlines. Let's talk about Max Kilman. Arguably, probably one of the. I mean, everything sort of changed with him a little bit, definitely in terms of since when Nuno's come in, he seems a more confident person in the last couple of games, as you'd assume. Having Nuno, been working with Nuno during his best time in terms of Wolves, and I think we'll see a different Max Kilman now playing for West Ham under Nuno. However, will we have much longer with Max Kilman, as reports are suggesting that Crystal Palace are reportedly going to attempt to sign the 28-year-old in the January transfer window. According to reports, he's a subject of interest from Crystal Palace, with the Eagles eager to reinforce the defensive unit by signing a centre-back in the winter window amid uncertainties surrounding Mark Gay's long-term future. And he's emerged as a target for the South London club. Now, we know that Mark Gay is coming to the end of his contract, runs out at the end of the season. So the idea being is they may well decide to sort of cash in while they can, otherwise he'll leave in June for nothing potentially, and see Max as a potential replacement. Ironically, they wanted to sign Igor in the summer transfer window to facilitate Gay's exit to Liverpool. However, he obviously ended up joining West Ham on loan on deadline day. So interesting to see if he becomes Gay's replacement. I don't think so. I think Nuno wants to build a little bit around him defensively. So, but who knows? Who knows, my friends? Who knows? Who knows when it comes to that? In terms of some of the players we've been linked with, one name that's sort of come out of the shadows once again is the Porto striker Samu. Not the killer whale, for anyone who remembers that in SeaWorld, but the young striker. He's a player we've had interest in, and according to transfer expert 𝗞𝗟𝗟𝗠𝗔𝗡, who's usually quite decent hit rate, really. He was on his Twitter over the weekend saying he's currently a player of interest at West Ham, but also Aston Villa, but also Spurs are planning a bid as well to cover for Dominic Solanke. Now, he does have a minimum release clause of £86 million. There is, so yeah, ain't going to work. Apparently, we did try a lot with a bid last winter, according to Ekim. But this was laughed off by Porto, who try, which is always a good sign when a bid gets laughed off. There's no doubt we need to buy a centre forward, a tall centre forward, a physical centre forward. Samu is a really interesting player. I think he could really adapt well. He's only like 21, I think. He's really young. But I just don't think we can afford him. I don't think Porto are going to sell him on the cheap either, because he's an asset they can keep for many years, really. But no, not going to happen. Another name we've been linked with over the last sort of week or so is Victor Roque. Now, the former Barcelona, current Palmeiras forward, is having a decent run of form so far. revived his form that he lost when he was at Barcelona, really, when they paid 30 million euro for him. And then he went to Real Betis, didn't have a great time there. But in February this year, he moved to Brazil, went back to Palmeiras, and a deal worth about 25 million euro, and has revived revived his form somewhat. 9 goals so far to date in the Brazilian Serie A. Has put him back on the radar for a lot of European clubs, including West. We held it in just before he went to Barcelona, but that didn't work. He decided, Las Ramblas were better than Westfield. Tough choice. But given our, obviously we spoke about that a little bit at lunchtime, it's been reported that West Ham are reportedly exploring a swap deal that involves 𝗞𝗟𝗟𝗓 being made as a make-weight, supplemented with a cash on top to sweeten the deal. So player plus cash. That was called by a few sources, including Claret and Hugh. I can't see this one happening. I think 𝗞𝗟𝗟𝗓 is someone I think we could has a really good future at West Ham potentially. When he was watching the training video that they did at Rush Green, I think the appointment of Nuno will really help Guilherme's case and cause and getting into the first team more regularly. You could see him. He was talking to Louis and he was talking in Portuguese and then talking in English, everyone else. And the ability to do that, I think, is fantastic in terms of bringing, the manager being sort of the central focal point. He can communicate rather than necessarily having to get interpreters and things like that, which under previous managers we've had to do, particularly under Lopetegui. He had obviously, what's his name? Rui, EU, something like that. He was like on the backroom staff, but like an interpreter as well. And yeah, didn't really work. And I think Potter maybe we struggled with players whose English isn't their first language, where we know Nuno speaks a number of languages as well. And I think that is critical now for the modern manager. So I think it's a risk with Victor Roque. So yeah, move it along. We've already had reports of Paqueta wanting to go back to Brazil, and Paqueta's camp coming out over the weekend saying Brazilian press just trying to stir something up. It's not going to happen. There's more chance of Haaland signing for West Ham on loan from Man City than Paqueta wanting to leave. So there we go. Now, obviously, over the weekend we had the appointment of, well, the official appointment of Potsy, Mark Robson, Gerard, and Billy as part of the West Ham backroom staff. I assume there maybe will be maybe one or two added of Nuno's men in there, but clearly, well, you can look at it two ways. You can say one way is it's great, he's sticking with West Ham people, and it's great news for the academy, which it is definitely, and I think that's not surprising that the likes of Potsy got some minutes at Arsenal, and Callum Marshall got minutes at Arsenal, particularly even now. But with Füllkrug out, Marshall's going to be even more critical for the next few weeks at least, because you'll have the former academy coaches in Nuno's ear. The flip side is maybe we couldn't afford to buy the others out of their contracts, and so as a in all danger release clause, Paul Cord in exit, it could be that actually we couldn't afford to bring everyone in, having spent almost potentially £20 million getting rid of Potter's lot and getting rid of Lopetegui's lot. That money, yes, and obviously the people that Nuno wants are very much still under contract at the likes of Nottingham Forest and at Benfica. But anyway, regardless of that, let's look at the positive side of that. And it's great that we've got the academy in there, and of course, good news for the club. Now, George, I want to talk about quickly. He, as you said, he had a hamstring issue recently. It's not as bad as previously thought. About 4 weeks out, so back hopefully by the end of November, which is perfect because then obviously that's the end of the international breaks until March. So there's lots of games to play consecutively. So having a fully fit squad until everyone fucks off for the AFCONs and so is critical. Now, he's in a really interesting. he's in a sort of not between a rock and a hard place, but he's in terms of his position in the squad. You've got to think of in terms of the attacking midfield slots. You got 𝗞𝗟𝗧, Fernandez, arguably ahead of him. We know that George was offered the opportunity to go out on loan in the summer transfer window, which he turned down in favour of fighting for his place in the first team. But his contract is due to expire at the end of the season. There's been no rumblings of renewal yet. So this is very much a make or break season for George in terms of in claret and blue. Now we know that West Bromwich Albion, they submitted an offer to take Earthy on loan. And apparently they are gearing up for another try in January. However, George needs game time. He's got a very difficult decision to make. Whether he decides to go out on loan in January, in the risk of coming to the end of his contract in the summer, he needs minutes. But will he get minutes ahead of the likes of 𝗞𝗟𝗧? Will he get minutes ahead of the likes of Fernandez? Will he get minutes ahead of the likes of even like Luis Guilherme? Probably not. And that's the real issue now. George is no denying his talent. He's a phenomenally gifted player. He does have an injury, a habit of getting injuries at the worst time. 2 or 3 times now he's got injuries just as a new manager's come in. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the next few months from November onwards. Will he be integrated into the first team? Obviously he's been playing a little bit of 21s before his injury to sort of keep his fitness going while he wasn't selected under Potter. With Nuno, there's a fresh chance, but obviously, he's not going to get on the grass until at least November. But you do have the likes of Mark Robinson. You do have Potsy in Nuno's ear saying what a quality player he is, and hopefully he will be given his chance. And then it's up to him to take it, really, isn't it? Then, his contract expiring in June 2026, it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the next few months. I think that will determine. I think if he's getting game time up until January, if an offer comes in, I think it'll be up to the loans committee to decide what's best for him. But obviously, with George and with Nuno's discussion in terms of what happens after that, if he goes out on loan, a bit like when Callum Marshall went out on loan to West Brom. In fact, he had to sign a new agreement before he went out on loan. Maybe that could be something that he's explored again with George, a similar thing. Obviously, hopefully get more minutes than Callum did when he was at West Brom. And then there's the whole question again. I'm just sticking to the academy. The question of Lewis Orford. He hasn't played a minute really for Stevenage at all. And I think that is a failure of the poor activity or the poor speed of our activity in the transfer window in the summer. I think if we got our business done earlier, I think Lewis would have had a better list of options to peruse and go for the best one. But Stevenage, I think also, in all honesty, with the Stevenage loan, Stevenage have had a really good start to the season. I think that surprised them as well. And as such, they want to keep the momentum going and maybe even push for promotion. So they're not going to risk putting an untested 20-year-old into a squad, into a first team. That's not a slight on Lewis at all. It's just what they know. And, so I could see why that's happened. And that's a case of circumstances rather than necessarily anything else. Oh, no, sorry. So I think about Sammy on there. But anyway, that's enough. That's enough of that. If you're new around here, don't forget to like, comment, share. If you've got a spare hype, give us a hype. It all helps the channel as we hurtle towards 30,000 subscribers, which is crazy. Never thought I'd say that 18 months ago at all. And don't forget to check out easymoneybrand.com for latest news, reviews, and opinions. And I'll see you later, my friends. Much love. Bye-bye.